What's going on, everyone? Tayler Kyles and Mike Kadlick here with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Prize Picks and Game Time. Continuing our position preview series, and today we are going with everybody's favorite position group, the special teamers. In all seriousness, guys, who don't get enough love and really should be getting some more recognition, considering the kickoffs are actually a play again, and these guys are going to have much more on their plate than they have in seasons past. So, Mike, you're the one who wrote this up. Give me a brief overview first of how you feel about the special teams unit before we get into surprise cuts, trade candidates, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I feel like we should have used this as a crossover episode with the Pat's Beat guys. Brian and Alex would love our special teams talk, but didn't think that one through. But no, this Patriots special teams unit really over the course of like the last 20 plus years has been like a cornerstone unit for the Patriots. I mean, you talk about huge kicks from Vinatieri moving into a guy like Matthew Slater, who became one of the best special teamers, if not the best special teamer in NFL history. So it's kind of been like a thing that the Patriots just have, solid special teams. I mentioned Vinatieri, Gostowski as well. He was a great one. And then Nick Folk too. So like they've always kind of had consistent, solid special teams units that you could rely on. And really over the last 2-3 years, that's really changed. They haven't been great. They struggled under Cam Acord once Joe Judge left for the Giants job. And then Joe Judge came back last year, draft Bryce Behringer, draft Chad Ryland, and you thought that, hey, maybe they can turn a corner here. But things still really weren't great. And like I mentioned, on top of that, Matthew Slater now retires after 16 seasons, Pro Bowls, Super Bowls, all that good stuff. So now it's really a new leaf for the special teams unit. You talk about not only a new head coach in Gerard Mayo, taking over the entire thing, but Jeremy Springer comes over from the Rams to run the special team specifically. You also have Chad Ryland, who really struggled last year. He was the Patriots' 4th-round pick last season, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes, but wasn't great as a kicker. And you talk about it as a guy who might not even be here next year, even though he was a 4th-round pick of this team. So Bryce Behringer punted well. Joe Cardona is obviously there as the long snapper. A guy in Brendan Schooler, who's been sort of Matthew Slater light for the last 2 years, now may turn into more of like, a leadership role on the unit. But I also think of it too, with the Patriots, they've always had, special teamers that are just basically on the team to play special teams, right? Chris Board, Cody Davis, Matthew Slater, guys like that. And now the only one they really have is Brendan Schooler. And maybe if you want to count like a guy like Christian Ellis, who was a practice squad linebacker last season. So times have changed a bit. Obviously, the kickoff's changing a bit. So I'll be very interested to see overall how the unit looks, how the shift looks from a guy like Jeremy Springer, who we watched him in the OTA program, Taylor. That guy is like a little ball of fire, just like running around, sweating as much as the players, like just trying to go out there. He looks like he could play still. So it's going to be fun to watch. I'm curious in general how the whole transition happens and what we see from especially the young guys in Behringer and Ryland this season.
Yeah, Tom Quinn's another one, the assistant special teams coach. He's someone who has a ton of experience, won a Super Bowl ring against the Patriots when he was with the Giants. So between him and Jeremy Springer, I am excited for the potential upside when it comes to the leadership, at least of the special teams unit. But the fact that they've lost so many players is going to be interesting. I do think that they've got a lot of players on this roster who could potentially kind of stand out and take on those roles. Like I did a whole list for it on Twitter, but some of those guys include, guys who are already there in Brendan Schooler, Jelani Tavai, and Marte Mapu, who are probably going to have to step up a little bit, but also guys like, we're going to touch on this a little bit more, but like Isaiah Baldwin, potentially, somebody that Gerard Mayo specifically called out and mentioned he could be someone who has a big role in their special teams. Sione Takitaki, Raekwon McMillan. McMillan especially was a big special teamer for them when he was healthy. So he kind of comes back in the fold, gives you another guy who you can probably depend on as long as he stays healthy. One of the running backs you'd expect, JaMychal Hasty or Deshaun Fenwick, whichever guy makes it is at RB3 is likely going to play. Hasty actually did play some special team snaps late last season. Some other guys like the tight ends, Jakeem Bell and Austin Hooper, if they make it, they're likely going to have some kind of impact there, especially Bell with his athleticism. And then Jalen Hawkins and Alex Austin, O'Shane Jimenez, if he makes the roster, he's someone I think is a dark horse, especially with all this weirdness with Matthew Judon. We don't know what's going to happen. I think Jimenez gives you some level of versatility on the edge, someone who can also play off the ball. And then Marcelo Style Jr., someone who is probably not going to make the roster. If he does, as a defensive back right away because there's just so many bodies there right now.
Right.
He'll probably kind of sneak on as a special teamer, a la kind of John Jones, then earn his snaps as they come. So there's a lot of people that could potentially fill the voids that are going to be left. But then when you look at the specialists like kicker and punter, excited about Bryce Behringer. He was good last season, and it's already continued. But you mentioned it, Chad Ryland, man, he really does scare you there. But luckily, when you look at, those that core unit, Bill Cardona is going to be around for the long haul, as consistent as anybody. Then Brendan Schooler was actually named All-Pro by the NFLPA last season. So really good special teamer there, someone who you'd like to kind of take over as that leader for Matthew Slater. We talked about it before the show. I wouldn't be surprised if Schooler, who's 27, definitely older for a guy where he is in his career, I wouldn't be surprised if he's maybe an extension candidate, although you would also want to see actually, is he eligible for extension, or is it at the end of this season?
This is his third year.
I think you're right. I think it is his third year.
Yeah.
So it might be after this season. Okay, so scratch that. But someone who I could potentially see if this season he does step up in that leadership role, like he's kind of mentioned to us, cuts back on some of the overly emotional stuff where he was just making boneheaded mistakes. I think you could see him kind of take over as one of the longer term pieces on that special teams unit.
Yeah, a guy who, as we go through the rest of, as we go through the article that I wrote on CLNSmedia.com and go through the, the podcast here, it's like there's a lot of guys there's not a lot of guys like Schooler anymore. What I mentioned before, that are on the team exclusively as special teamers, like all those guys you mentioned, and Dial and the third RB, and like Jelani Tavacion and Takitaki, like those guys play the other on the other units as well, where Brendan Schooler is just a special teamer. So like we'll talk about who I'm sleeping on in a second. I don't have them listed, but they still impact special teams just as much, and that's why I think this unit's so interesting. Not only for the Patriots kind of moving forward in this new era, but really the whole thing in general, just where the kickoff's going and things like that. It's a fun, different unit, in football that I'm excited about for the Patriots specifically this year. So
100%. You mentioned the sleepers, so let's go with that as our next category. Who do you think that Patriots fans are not paying enough attention to in the special teams core?
Yeah, like I just said, someone who's not listed in the roster projection because he doesn't exclusively play special teams. But I think we're sleeping on what Isaiah Bolden can do on special tems for the Patriots. You mentioned what Mayo said during the offseason program, that he's sort of could be a special teams demon. He's obviously not like a short, quick cornerback, but he's long and aggressive, and he's also super fast too. Which you saw at Jackson State in 2021. He led the NCAA in yards per attempt for kick returns, and he also led the FBS with 2 touchdowns. He was one of the best kick returners in college football 2 years ago. We obviously didn't see it last year because he got injured out in Green Bay with the head and neck injury, missed the entire season. And we also haven't seen him return any kicks in the offseason program. They stuck with, Marcus Jones and a couple of the young wide receivers, and Jalen Polk and Javon Baker and Antonio Gibson as well, who, is a good return man in his own right. But I'll be curious if they actually end up giving Isaiah Bolden a chance to return some kicks. That'll give him an opportunity to make the roster, but it also gives them almost like a secret weapon, someone who was so good in college that we haven't really seen it happen before. So that's why I think we're sleeping on him as a specialist, because we just haven't seen that part of his game at the NFL level yet. But with the new kick return rules, with the success he had at college at Jackson State, I think that, they could really unleash that at some point, and it could make them, a lot more successful in the return game.
100%. And last preseason, one thing that did stand out for Isaiah Bolden, there were some parts in coverage where you're like, yeah, this is a guy who still needs to learn, has a lot of physical talent, but his work against the run was really impressive from what I saw. You can tell he is physical. I think he'd be more than willing to play that phase of the game. They actually have him right now as their starting nickel corner, at least when we were in mini camp and OTAs, which kind of shows you that's one of those roles where there's a lot on your plate in terms of being a tackler and making plays in space. So it's clear they at least think he has the foundational kind of tools to be able to thrive in that role, whether he's returning just as a tackler or blocker, especially now that Matthew Slater is gone. I think opposite Brendan Schooler, we might see a bit of a competition there, both in terms of blocking and as an actual gunner. So Bolden, Christian Gonzalez, I feel like those are 2 guys who could potentially make an impact there. For me personally, I'm going to throw Marte Mapu out there. I was kind of choosing between him and Jelani Tavai, but as those guys who among the top 10 special team snap leaders, Mapu and Jelani Tavai were right up there, and they're some of the few guys who are going to give you continuity. And then Mapu in that game against Denver actually was one of the reasons the Patriots won and almost screwed themselves in the quarterback race, which obviously is not really his fault.
That's
but he
right.
forced
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that ended up getting recovered. I think it was by Cody Davis for a touchdown. So Mapu is someone who I feel like in year 2, once he's a little more familiar and comfortable within the scheme. Obviously, we don't know how it's going to carry over to special teams necessarily, but he's someone who's going to go after the ball, and you can see that when he's really locked in. So when it comes to special teams being able to make those game-changing plays, I think Mapu is someone I don't want people to kind of sleep on. Although we think of him as just a defender, he's going to be playing in the third phase of the game a whole lot, and because he has that playmaking ability, I think he could be someone who kind of pops up pretty often.
Yeah, it'll be exciting. Again, we talked about Mapu in our safeties video, or in our safeties sort of depth projection too, as far as his impact on the defensive side of the ball. But if he doesn't necessarily, not that if he does or doesn't, I guess it doesn't matter, but if he's not necessarily that third safety all the time or even second safety all the time, he's going to be used on special teams that much more, can make the roster, make the impact, and, make his value that much more if he contributes on the, this third phase of the game. So
Mapu breakout sophomore year. Fingers crossed, baby. All right, we got much more for you, but first, quick word for our friends at Prize Picks. Be right back. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. With the NBA Finals over, the hoops action doesn't stop on Prize Picks. Women's basketball is just heating up, with stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves, alongside greats like Breanna Stewart and Asia Wilson. You can earn up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. Prize Picks is available in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I made my first $10 deposit and received an instant $10 bonus. If you have the skills, you can play for a shot at turning your $10 into $1,000. I've got Caitlin Clark for more than 3.5 3-points made and Breanna Stewart for more than 23 points. For baseball, I've got Kyle Schwarber for more than 9-hitter fantasy score and Bryce Miller for more than 4 pitcher strikeouts. Download the app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, brother, let's talk your surprise cut candidate. Spoiler alert, might not be that surprising, but we do our best with what we got.
Yeah, it's the only reason it's a surprise is because he was a 4th-round pick last year, and it's Chad Ryland. I mean, at this point, I think it might even be more likely that Joey Sly or whoever else they bring into camp ends up being their starting kicker when it's all said and done, because Ryland just hasn't been good. And sometimes you just have to eat your losses and, kind of cut it loose, before it's too late, really. And that's kind of what we've seen with Chad Ryland so far. Some numbers: he was only 64% of his field goal attempts in his rookie season. He was just 50% from 40 yards or more. And then he had another shaky start to the start of this season in the OTA program, where every single session, every single time the kickers went out there, he did not go 100% once. He always missed one kick. And it's so mental. Special teams, specifically kicking and even punting, it's such a mental game. It's kind of like golf, where your form has to be perfect, but you can also just, one thing goes wrong and it messes up everything. And I think that's kind of what we've seen with Chad Ryland. And once he's in his own head, look, I'm not going to sit here and say he's mentally weak and he's got to get over it and this, that, and the other thing. He's talked about how he has worked on that and improved on that. But when push comes to shove, you need to make your kicks, and he hasn't done that so far. So if they needed to make cuts today from what we saw in the offseason program, I think they probably would go with Joey Sly over him. That's just the reality of the situation. So, again, only a real surprise because of the draft stock they put into him last year, taking him in the 4th round. But he's just not that good of a kicker right now. So we're going to need to see a lot of improvement from him in training camp. Make those kicks. Make them from deep. Be consistent. Don't miss a kick. I mentioned it, but they would go 5 and 5 kicks, him and Sly. Every single time it felt like Ryland was 4 of 5, 4 of 5, 4 of 5. He could never go 100%. And that just tells me that something's off and he can't get it right. So again, we need to see it happen in order for him to be the kicker of this team next year.
And even a lot of the makes weren't very convincing. Like, there were a few where you had to kind of look around like, all right, did that go in or what? Like, literally hitting the bar, where I'm thinking, like, I hate that stupid rule where it's, it goes up to the heavens. Because if it went up to the heavens, the ball would doink off.
Right.
So such a dumb rule, but it is what it is. I'm not on the competition committee or whatever. But yeah, it was just looking at the quality of the field goals even. It's just not consistent enough. And Ryland talked to us about how he worked on his form this offseason. You can tell it definitely did change. Shout out to Brian Hines for actually pointing that out and asking about it. But at the same time, maybe there are some kinks that he's still working out. I know that Tom Quinn is someone who's worked with kickers in the past. I was hoping maybe he could help. And it is still very early in the offseason process. Maybe this time away will help him kind of reset and then get things together by training camp. But we have not seen enough to justify him getting a roster spot. And I always bring this up, but last season, he was bad by college kicker standards, like an extra points field goals, like truly inexcusably bad. And we're talking about a team that is going to probably be defense and run game first. So there's going to be a lot of close games. As we saw last year, those field goals matter. If you miss extra points or field goals, it comes back to bite you when it puts your offense in a really difficult spot. Now, no kicker's perfect. Everybody's going to miss, but we're talking about several close games that were ultimately decided or significantly impacted by Chad Ryland misses. Worked out great last season. Thank you, Chad, for those misses because it got everybody Drake May, and there's actually hope back in New England, but you don't want to live in that area. So I 100% agree. You know, we always say this caveat, we're all rooting for Chad, but at the same time, you can't look at what he's done on the field, especially with Joey Sly, who wasn't even doing anything the first couple of days. Literally, remember when we worked to the volunteering, I thought he was a trainer. The guy, he's like a very unsuspecting guy.
He looked like Cooper Kupp. He never wore a helmet for like 2 days that he was there. He had like this like long beard and like crew like hair with like a flow on top. I was like, by the way, is that Cooper Kupp? And he's jacked. Yeah, I was like, it looked like Cooper Kupp. We had no idea who it was. Turns out he's he's right on Chad Ryland's heels right now. So yeah, it doesn't look good for our friend Chad. But we'll talk about Nick Folk more in a second on our next thing. Even last season, Nick Folk was better than Chad Ryland in the preseason. It just made more sense to trade him away because of what his age was, what you could get for him, and then what Ryland's age was as a rookie 4th-round pick. You knew he had to make the team, but he hasn't really been the best kicker in either of the 2 preseasons. So again, we'll see what happens. He needs a lot of improvement, but right now it would be, I guess it wouldn't be all that surprising if Chad wasn't on the team this year.
But again, you made the good point. A 4th-round pick, you're not expecting to get cut in the second year, almost no matter who it is, unless there's some kind of off-the-field issue. But that's just how it is when you're a kicker. It's not, there can only really be one ideally, and if you have 2, that's usually not great business. For my surprise cut, I've actually got Jalen Reagor. And this one's kind of out of left field, I feel like, because he's really gotten the lion's share of starting reps when it comes to the kick return duties. Yeah. He seems like he's the guy, obviously had the return against the Bills. And I do think he's a good fit for this system because he is good after contact. I feel like in this new kickoff structure, if you do get past that first line of defense, especially with his speed, he could be gone. So it's not really that I don't think he's a good fit, but when it comes down to who do you need on the roster and, how you're going to allocate spots, even though Isaiah Bolden hasn't gotten those opportunities, he's probably one of the more talented guys in the role whenever he gets a chance. And then besides Jalen Reagor, the other guys who are stepping up in that line were people in offensive skill position players or skill players where you expect them to make the roster, like Jalen Polk, like, Demario Douglas sometimes, Antonio Gibson, even KJ Osborne. And at some point, if you're looking at Jalen Reagor, the wide receiver, and you're seeing that he gets to be the backup when Tyquan Thornton's out there, but then Kayshon Boutte ends up being the one who pops off. Now, again, a lot of that's due to opportunities, but I think Reagor also had a pretty bad drop at one point in those later sessions. So I just don't know if he gives you as much as a receiver to justify only keeping him on special teams when you have so many other skill players who are going to make the team, who can also contribute on returns, whether they're good, bad, or whatever. You'd hope you'd find something to stick to the wall with so many talented ball carriers. But yeah, with Jalen Reagor, I just wouldn't be super shocked if he ends up being a guy who gets cut because maybe they want to keep another young receiver or 2 or another position needs depth or something like that.
Yeah, if it comes down to those, we talked about it last episode or the running backs episode where it's the 53rd roster spot and maybe Jalen Reagor becomes the last guy off. Like we talked, I attributed it to March Madness a little bit where you're kind of making different decisions based on 2 different things, right? And so like if Reagor doesn't bring that much more return value than a guy like KJ Osborne, then you're probably going to want to give a younger wide receiver an opportunity to play actual more offense because Rager's not going to be that guy at the X receiver, even though he was, again, solid down the stretch as a return man last year. But you mentioned it, Isaiah Bolden. We mentioned it earlier, Isaiah Bolden, one of the best kick returners in college football 2 years ago. And if you have the young guys that you know that Polk and Baker are going to make the team. If they're just a little bit worse than Jalen Rager, you can save a roster spot that way, give it to somebody else who might be more deserving on the other side of the football, and go from there. So, Rager's stance on the team, I felt like has, ebbed and flowed since they re-signed him this offseason. And you thought, well, he's just coming back and he could be a cut. And then he actually, ends up as that top return man, but he struggles on offense again. So we'll see what happens. But as of right now, I agree with you. I think it's a solid pick for somebody who could easily be cut that you might not, that you might not exactly think of.
Yeah, and he's also only a kick returner. It might be different if he also returned punts, but we haven't really seen him as the punt guy. He's really only, and those are different. Like there's a different feel because on kicks, you can secure it and have a chance to run versus punts where you're catching it and there's people around you. And it takes a different level of awareness to be like, all right, I should take this. I shouldn't. Like you're literally looking at so many different things while looking up. So that's another thing that kind of doesn't work in his favor. He really is a pretty one-dimensional. Maybe they use him as a gadget guy and he gets some value there. But again, I just wouldn't be surprised if they moved on.
Yeah.
All right, trade candidate. Who do you think the Patriots could potentially move in a group that, has its ups and downs, but, like some other groups we talked about, maybe not a lot of guys who people are like drooling over on the trade market.
Yeah, we're grasping at straws a little bit this one here, but I didn't want to cop out and say none. So I'm going with Joey Sly, the other kicker. So we mentioned Ryland has to have a really good training camp to make the team. So for the sake of discussion, let's say he does. But let's also say that Joey Sly does as well. And they go back and forth, battle it out. Teams see both kickers in the preseason make every single kick, and they hear from training camp and they read from the beat reporters that, Joey Sly and Chad Ryland are both nails from 65 plus every day. Just hypothetically speaking, you might actually get some trade value for a guy like Joey Sly because, last year they had it with Nick Folk. Nick Folk was great in the preseason, but I think he's 37 or he's on the older side. Patriots just drafted Ryland. So you had to see what you had on the market for a guy like Nick Folk, and they were able to swap him out for a 7th-round pick from Tennessee. Now, the reason I say it's grasping at straws is because this is Joey Sly's 8th team in 5 seasons since he was undrafted out of where'd he go to college? I don't remember, but I was looking at it earlier, 2019. yeah, exactly. But so again, he's a guy who's been cut. He's been on practice squads. Are you going to be able to get a 7th rounder for him? Probably not, but he's and I wrote this down earlier too. He's the franchise leader in longest kick return in Washington Commanders history. He had a 61-yarder a few years ago. He's made 82.3% of his field goal attempts and 88.5% of his extra points over his career. So a consistent player. If he plays well in preseason, you might be able to flip him for a future 7th-round pick, call it. So that's the reason he's the only real trade candidate here, because you're not trading Behringer. You're not going to get anything for Chad Ryland right now. Joe Cardona not happening. Brendan Schooler, you're not trading these guys. So the only one you really doubled up at kicker, and you're not going to get anything for Ryland. So I think Sly could make sense as somebody who you might be able to flip if he has a good preseason.
Yeah, I mean, like he's a replacement level starter, but at kicker, unless you are nails and you are consistent and really good, you're probably going to end up being on a few teams because you can be replaced. So, sometimes all it takes is one injury for some team to be like, we really need a kicker and we're willing to give you like a 7th-round pick. It could be like Nick Folk's situation. Obviously, he hasn't been quite as consistent, but Nick Folk is someone who, although he did kind of just have some weird rebirth when he went to the Titans, and it felt like he was kind of hitting field goals from 50 plus, which he wasn't even really attempting with the Patriots. And when he did, it was ugly. But Nick Folk can literally be someone who you don't rely on to kick from more than 50 yards, and he can still get a job somewhere. And I think they traded him last season also to be close to his family. I think that was the reason.
That's right.
His family was in Texas or something like that, and they traded him to Tennessee. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Again, if one team just has an injury, it's like decent kickers don't really grow on trees necessarily. So if Chad Ryland does have a bounce back and Joey Sly also plays well, I think it will make a ton of sense to potentially see him get traded for a solid day 3 pick or something like that. Nothing crazy, but that pick could turn anybody.
Yeah.
All right. We are going to wrap this up with our roster projection and grades for the special teams. But first, quick for the words from our friends at Game Time. Be right back.
Nothing says summer quite like a live baseball game. And whenever I want to check out a Red Sox game at Fenway, I'm using Game Time, the best place for last-minute deals on tickets. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. With Game Time, it's as easy as finding the game you want to attend, getting a view of the entire stadium to see what prices look like in different areas, and they actually do you a favor and show you both the cheapest tickets available and the best deals. You can also get the view from the seat that you pick, and between their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and job loss protection, there's really no better option than Game Time. And with Game Time's lowest price guarantee, the app will actually credit you 110% of the difference if you find a cheaper ticket elsewhere. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, roster projection time, buddy. Who's in, who is out among the specialists? And this is going to be the core special team. We're just not going to talk about like Tavai or Mapu because obviously they mostly play other spots. This is going to be for the guys who primarily play special teams.
Yeah, so our punter is going to be Bryce Behringer, who was awesome last year. Joe Cardona sticks around as the long snapper. Brendan Schooler is your core special teamer that, makes the roster. And then I have Joey Sly beating out Chad Ryland as the kicker for this team. Now, might it be somebody else? Potentially. I think they're going to keep Sly. I think they liked what they saw from him enough where he sticks around. But I think any kicker right now is going to beat out Chad Ryland, who has really struggled. And unless he really flips a switch, I don't see it happening. So on the outs, I have kicker Chad Ryland, and then linebacker Christian Ellis, who we talked about a little bit earlier, is really vying for that second core special teamer role. And I just don't think he makes the cut. I don't think he gives you enough at linebacker to justify keeping him there. So the only real surprise, again, is I think Ryland, unfortunately, after two struggling seasons, unfortunately doesn't make the cut.
Yeah, I'm not going to beat the Ryland thing over the head. I had my ins and outs completely the same. The one thing with Christian Ellis, kind of looking back at his impact plays on special teams, there weren't any that really stood out for a guy who only plays in that area of the game. Like if you're going to be on the team as a specialist, as what I mentioned, there's so many people who actually play other roles that could also contribute on special teams. I just don't think there's going to be a whole lot of roles for those kinds of guys outside of Schooler, who we know is excellent in that area. So I 100% agree. I just don't know that Ellis does enough for you to really move the needle and stick to the roster. And yeah,
you have Sly over Chad.
Oh yeah, because Chad hasn't been nearly consistent enough, and I don't know. I mean, you have to draft a kicker again probably, and that's going to stink. But it's for the betterment of your football team, and if Chad's not showing you any progress, there's just not a whole lot you can do. Maybe you keep him on the practice squad or something like that. I feel like if he does continue to struggle, that's your best case scenario, considering he, again, was bad for college. And I'm not trying to twist the knife, but I mean, when you struggle that much as a rookie, even though teams need kickers, that's the kind of area where it's like, yeah, I could see him actually being able to kind of slide through waivers. Totally. All right. What's your grade for this group?
They get a C, right down the middle. You have a really good young punter in Bryce Behringer and a solid core special teamer, obviously in Brendan Schooler. But on the other side, a kicking mystery. Again, we're beating it over the head here with Chad, and I feel bad, but that's just kind of what it is. You don't know what you have at place kicker in Ryland or Joey Sly, really, because we haven't seen enough of it. So that brings the room down. And you lose Matthew Slater, and you have another coordinator here in Jeremy Springer. So a lot of it's kind of unknown. So we have to see how a lot of it plays out, but for right now, I can't give them higher than a C because we haven't seen enough from the coordinator, from the place kicker. And the whole kickoff thing is really a mystery too. Like we don't know how that's going to happen, what that's going to look like. We don't know how their return games or their kickoffs will look. So right now they get a C. Obviously, room to improve depending on what happens this year, but for now, right down the middle.
I would go C just because I think Bryce, Joe, and Brendan kind of even out a bit the fact that because kicker is so important, the fact that you have inconsistency there, but the fact that you also don't necessarily know what you're going to get out of your new special teamers as well, I kind of bump it down to a C-. I'm, again, excited about Springer, excited.
Tayler Kyles is more pessimistic than Mike Kadlick.
Just unknowns. Wow. Just because there's unknowns. Like, it's not necessarily that they're going to be bad. Right. It's just I have no idea. I can't really even say that they're going to be average, but I think the fact that they do have three guys where you know what you're going to get out of them and they do play impact positions, that does raise the grade a little bit. All right. Let the people know what preview you got coming down the pipeline next and when it's going to drop.
Yep, we got linebackers coming. We're going to hit the linebacker position on Wednesday on clnsmedia.com. We have right in front of me, let's see, we've done 5 rooms now. We have 5 left. Linebackers, tight ends, cornerbacks, wide receivers, and quarterbacks. leading up over the next 2 weeks until training camp. So next one, like I said, linebackers on Wednesday, and we'll have a video to follow it up as well here on Patriots Press Pass.
We'll have a lot more to chew on in those episodes, so looking forward to that. But until then, thank you all as always for watching. Now take care of yourselves, take care of each other. We will see you next time. Peace, y'all.